I played tons of NES games, not as many as I would like, but enough to know what I like and dislike about the console. A while back, almost a year ago, I sat down and played every single damn sports game on the NES, and from that I generated a list of what I perceived as the top 10 best NES sports games. But this time we're talking about the worst. Now before we hop into this, I do want to acknowledge that you might disagree with this list, and that's okay. I can't take the memories you hold from these games away from you, and in no way am I saying this as a make or break. Let's begin. Tecmo, now that's a name that ended up on our best NES sports games list because Tecmo's Super Bowl, hands down, is one of the best football games of the 8-bit generation. The cutscenes, the simulating entire seasons for every single team, it's awesome. And the only thing that sucked about it was the sprite flicker, but that comes with the territory for NES games. But how did Tecmo handle baseball? Quite poorly if you ask me. When I played this, I noticed that the bat that we use almost never seems to hit the ball. It only seems to aim directly in front, which is kind of counterintuitive when the baseball is flying at what seems to be your head. So I started setting up for a bunt and noticed that Tecmo tried to do what Jaleco did in Bases Loaded 2 and 3, where you could choose a zone, but even then, I couldn't hit a single ball. And if I can't hit a single ball, that's a problem. Pitching isn't that bad, but fielding is rough because it's really difficult to judge where the ball will land. In terms of games on this list, this is probably the one that might be somewhat divisive because these sports were getting their first true representation on a modern console, or at least what can be perceived as a modern console. But I felt that many other baseball games at the time did better. Even Nintendo's baseball was more playable to me. Wayne Gretzky is known as the Great One for a reason, and when you want to sell your shitty software to the masses, it's important to get that nifty little endorsement. A person's name can be a massive boost to the sales of a product. Now, hockey was one of the sports that really didn't get a great representation on the NES. We had Blades of Steel, which was excellent, ice hockey, which was more arcade than I would like, and then you had pro sport hockey, which if I didn't own Blades of Steel, I would consider the best. But what about Bethesda, right? Wayne Gretzky hockey. No! For starters, it's a top-down game, which, whatever, fine, I get it. The players, if you want to call them that, move around in a way that is conducive to human life, but not conducive to a good time. In fact, you're going to be vividly confused if you don't own the manual. It took me about 20 minutes to realize the select button, you know, the one next to the D-pad, allows you to change characters. So for about 20 minutes, I was just spinning around, attempting to get the puck, not making any moves, all the while these wind direction indicators from an atmospheric map, because that's exactly what they look like, were scoring on me. Also, it felt like my teammates were almost never on screen, which makes passing extremely unreliable. If I were you, I would stick to Blades of Steel or Pro Sports Hockey.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the LGN roller coaster. Keep all your hands and feet inside the ride at all times and prepare to be disappointed. No refunds allowed. Fuck you.
LJN had the luxury of publishing early wrestling merchandise for commercial sale. The only aspect of it I've personally experienced was their video games. Now, full disclosure, wrestling was not easy to program on the NES. We clearly needed more than 2 buttons to pull off these combos, and developers had to work with what they had, and in this case it was Rare, and Rare did manage to allow for a very small smidge of a moveset, but that's overshadowed by an incredibly off-putting isometric camera angle. Now that angle works in arcade games, be it Snake Rattle and Roll or Marble Madness, Congo Bongo, etc., it does not work for fighting games. Most of the time when I played this, I was whiffing my strikes because I wasn't lined up in the pixel-perfect way that Rare demanded. There is a stamina bar on the side of the ring, but good luck winning. Now I will say, later LGN wrestling games are significantly better. In my opinion, Steel Cage Challenge is probably the best, but that wasn't Rare, it was Sculptured Software.
Didn't you hear? One ride equals a free ride. Even if you don't want to get off, you're getting another one. Double fuck you.
Now, this is a game that came out before Wrestlemania Challenge, and all I can say is that Wrestlemania Challenge did it slightly better, albeit with that shitty isometric angle. In WWF Wrestlemania, we could choose from 6 wrestlers: Hulk Hogan, the Honky Tonk Man, Bam Bam Bigelow, Macho Man Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, or Andre the Giant. And once you choose your character, you enter a non-stop slap fest of bullshit that makes absolutely zero, and I do mean 0 sense. There is some variety in what the characters can do. For example, Ted DiBiase eye gouges people, while Bam Bam Bigelow has 2 distinct different running attacks. And the only thing I found interesting is that the sole character who can body slam Andre the Giant is Hulk Hogan, which, if we look at the history of WWF lore, that is true, right? So props, Rare, on one very technical detail that does not impact the gameplay in any way. Props. I know some folks might like this and that I might seem a little harsh, but I absolutely hate these games because I feel they could have done so much better. Well, we talked about a few different companies that shit the bed today. Early Rare games were hit or miss. Sculptured Software was known to push out some stinkers. But in Japan, Toze is one of the companies that make me look both ways before I push the power button. Now, NES Play Action Football utilizes the 1989 depth chart for actual players, which is cool. But because Toze couldn't snag the rights to specific teams like LGN could, for that exact same year, mind you, and we'll talk about that in a second, we instead were isolated to 8 teams: Los Angeles, Denver, San Francisco, Washington, Miami, New York, Houston, and Chicago. But you won't find the team names, right? There are no Chicago Bears, New York Jets or New York Giants, Miami Dolphins, Washington Redskins, San Francisco 49ers. The names of the teams aren't there because they couldn't secure the rights. Which isn't a big deal because not a lot of companies had the money to fight for licensing like others would. But this is Nintendo that published this, so I think they could have. What do you think? Feel free to let me know down in the comments section below. Now, one of my favorite NES football games is Tecmo Bowl, Super Tecmo Bowl. The original one's Butthole, but we've already talked about that. In fact, if you want to check out the companion episode to this particular one where I cover the top 10 best NES sports games, I'll go ahead and link that down below as well and at the end of this video. So, NES Play Action Football is a basic football game, and that's fine, but the problem is it's canted. The view is turned in a pseudo-isometric format, and that annoys the fuck out of me. We started play zoomed in, like 400%, and once we snap the ball, it zooms out 400%, which is jarring if you don't expect it, and it leaves literally no room for error. And if we punt it, there's a third perspective where the ball goes high in the air. It's just not fun, and I blame the camera. For once, I blame the camera on an NES game. One of the games that almost made this list was 10-Yard Fight, but what if another company took the principle of 10-Yard Fight and slightly enhanced it, turned it sideways instead of top down, and hey, as a little kiss on the dick tip, they managed to snag the rights to actual NFL teams. That's what NFL is. This game was released in 1989, and if you recall, I just mentioned that NES Play Action Football did not secure the rights to the 1989 season for the National Football League. That's because LJN did. Now, this game is fundamentally important because with professional sports, there are not many games that allowed for a no bullshit license from the NFL. Prior to this, NFL football on the Intellivision did, and that was 1979, 10 years prior to the release of this game. So, props. LJN nailing that deal was huge. To me, this game feels like a sideways 10-yard fight. It's slow as hell. When you pass the ball, it floats in the air like there's zero gravity. And if we want to keep that mental meta, it makes sense why people move so slowly. We have football players giving 110% and a lower gravity coefficient. Hell yeah! Space football. Also, if we pass the ball, we see a slow transition to the catch, then a slow transition to the action. Everything about this game is just slow. But props to Atlas, that was the company that made this, for managing to keep the spirit of football going during this time. As we move towards the 16-bit era of sports games, I feel these mechanics will improve tremendously, and for me, this is one of those games that just came with the territory. You know, I think this is football, but instead, it looks like astronauts waddling on a football field. Now, this is an arcade game, through and through. It's an arcade game, and it was published by Trade West. And if you don't know who Trade West is, they published Double Dragon and Battletoads for the NES, so you probably have heard of them, you just didn't really care to think about it. The game itself is very slow. The only thing that really stands out to me as different is that when we throw the ball, we have to guide a cursor to the person we want to throw it to, which is dumb because this actively occurs while the ball, and more importantly, the people who want to remove your head from your torso, are moving. Overcomplicating the basic throw mechanic really sank this game into the dirt for me, and there are way better options. I know in the past I've received flack for including racing games or games of a racing variety in sports, but you have to understand, I've taken the time to play every single sports game on the NES, so I already did the footwork. So I figured, why not just talk about it? Yet another company that released games that make you want to sit down on a bouncing Betty and become one with Jesus while becoming one with everyone around you at the same time is Real Time Associates. Now, the hot shit game that involved racing fast was RC Pro-Am. And if you take the time to play Monster Truck Rally, you'll see that this is essentially the same game, but yet again, overly zoomed in for whatever reason. And they overcomplicated the controls to the point where it makes no fucking sense. We have two buttons, B and A. A makes you go fast, but only if you press it over and over again, and make sure you release it at a certain point so you can shift into the next gear. B makes you brake and also reverse, and of course the D-pad rotates you. However, the controls in this game are the equivalent of a blue whale trying to pilot a hot air balloon. It feels like it's constantly fighting you. You have to struggle to get any traction, and by the time you figure it out, your opponent's already lapped you 3 times. And what's funny is that most Monster Truck games to me didn't fare well. But if you wanted a game to play with your friends and be miserable the whole time, then hey, Monster Truck Rally's for you. You ever heard of ICOM? They did a few cool games, like the Legendary Axe, which I love by the way, Amagon, Astyanax, the Moffat Conspiracy, which is a Golgo 13 game, or even Saint Dragon, which if you've never played Saint Dragon, that's an awesome game. I'm sure I'll cover it at some point. But their third game ever as a company was Hoops, also known as Moedo Junior Basket 2-on-2. And it is the most depraved, boring game of pickup 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 that you will ever find. Once we enter the match, we play a standard game of 1-on-1, which has its own rules. If you get the ball on rebound, you need to go to half court or bring it back before attempting to shoot a goal, which is fine. The issue is the AI is an absolute douchebag. There are no fouls, so they're constantly on your ass like a hemorrhoid while you're trying to figure out how to shoot. I never scored a single basket in this. Basketball is just one of those sports that had a fairly decent presence on the NES with 10 different games. At least 3 of them were 1-on-1 or 2-on-2. In fact, Round Ball 2-on-2 is perhaps my favorite, with Jordan vs. Bird being slightly behind that. One of the common phrases I like to use in my life is less is more. And that's applicable to like 90% of the stuff that we encounter in our daily lives, be it cooking a dinner, having a date night with our significant other, or maybe even a family fun night. Keep it simple, right? Well, Gremlin didn't get that memo for that phrase in 1992 when they released Greg Norman's Golf Power. Now, who the fuck is Greg Norman? He's an Aussie golfer known as the Shark, but my first exposure to him was sitting for 2 minutes twiddling my thumbs waiting for a golf course to load up, and then proceeding to suffer from some of the shittiest golfing mechanics I've ever experienced in the last century, fair dinkum. Literally, you enter the game, choose what you want to do, and then you wait. This isn't a computer game. I'm not expanding this for drama. This is how long it takes to load. Ew. Just let me whack balls, bro. It's not like I know what I'm doing, so just let me figure it out. And boy, figuring it out is a bad idea. This game in particular is incredibly counterintuitive for how many golf games would be at the time. We have to hold down the A button until it goes to the desired power level, then press A again when the needle comes to the left to determine if we hook center or slice the ball. I appreciate that the game suggests what club to use, but the power distribution doesn't make sense to me at all. In fact, it constantly feels like the game is acting against you. To me, Golf from Nintendo was eons better, and that came out long before this one, so there really is no excuse. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? I do want to give a shout out to Jim McClements5229, as he was the first person to suggest a video for me after I started really committing to making them for you all. He wanted the top 10 best sports games, and from that I built the qualifiers that I use to make these 10 lists every day. So thank you, Jim. You're a legend and a pillar of this community. By the way, if you made it to the end of this video, you're already home in our community. We're a group of folks who enjoy remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live, and if that's something you vibe with, feel free to subscribe. We are tremendously close to that 8,000 subscriber milestone, and if we hit it, I'll do a video of the community's choice, and then you won't hear about numbers again until it's time to do our next major milestone. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.